in a certain vast galaxy, the entirety of which was ruled by the Galactic Republic in the past, but now this republic has been destroyed and is now ruled by a galactic empire. Not only does the Galactic Empire use despotic violence to oppress all of the planets in their galaxy, but they also are trying to rule the entire universe. However, the fight against the Empire's rule has never ceased. In order to put down the rebels, the Empire's ruler, Tarkin, puts his supporter the dark-robed Lord Vader in command of a trans-universal carrier ship to seek out and suppress rebellion on every planet. On this day, the trans-universal carrier discovers a rebel spacecraft on its way to a desert planet named Tatooine. Vader immediately orders his crew to follow and attack. And so they shoot a high-energy ray to ambush the spacecraft. In order to dodge the ray, the spacecraft bobs and weaves. But its solar panel is still hit in the end, sending shards, priceless metal and plastic blasting out into space and leaving the spacecraft shaking. It looks like Leia won't be able to escape from Vader's clutches, carrying secret marching orders. Rebel leader Princess Leia immediately takes the robot R2 to her secret storeroom, and after pressing and turning certain parts on R2, faces him with urgent agitation and begins to speak. A little while later, R2 walks out of the secret storeroom and finds another robot, C-3PO. R2 can only speak the language of machines, but C-3PO looks like a person and can speak human languages. The spacecraft is ambushed again, and the two robots are shot into a long, narrow corridor by the enormous vibrations, leaving them hurt and tired. They listen carefully, and discover that the spacecraft has stopped moving. The carrier has drawn aside the spacecraft, and the soldiers from both sides are already facing off. Unexpectedly, armor-clad Imperial soldiers jump through a hole in the roof one after another. Just as the first regains his balance, he is shot in the head with a brilliant ray by a rebel, causing his armor, bones and flesh to explode in every direction. The air in the corridor is filled with smoke and crisscrossing high-energy beams. Blood and flesh fly all about. The two robots hurriedly huddle to one side. The rebels are hopelessly outnumbered and the survivors are taken captive. At this time, the two meet a tall commander of the Imperial forces. Vader appears wearing a black cape and a metal mask. His armor is already black enough, but it's not nearly as black as his heart. At the sight of him, the rebels begin to shake uncontrollably, and the Imperial troops don't dare to make a sound either. Vader wants a rebel officer to tell him who is the commanding officer on the ship, and where the secret information tapes are kept, but the rebel officer doesn't pay him any heed. In the end, Vader uses a metal-clad hand to strangle him to death. The Imperial troops search the vessel thoroughly, but they can't find the information tapes. After putting up a strong resistance, Princess Leia is finally captured. When Princess Leia is brought before Vader, she doesn't show any fear, and instead spits contemptuously in his direction. An Imperial officer advises that they take care of her immediately, but Vader says, "No, she is my one and only key to finding the rebel base. I'm prepared to make full use of her, even if it means killing her in the process. Escort her onto the carrier." In the heat of the battle, R2 and C-3PO run this way and that, eventually sneaking into an escape pod. R2 presses a sequence of buttons on the control panel in front of the pilot's seat, and after a thunderous crash, the escape pod carries them away from the wrecked spacecraft. On the carrier, as soon as an officer discovers what has happened, he immediately asks the captain whether or not he should open fire. The captain glances at the scanner locked onto the escape pod. The screen is blank, indicating that there aren't any life forms on the escape pod, because the captain believes it would be a waste of ammunition to destroy it. The pod escapes unscathed. The pod lands safely on the desert planet. R2 and C-3PO climb out. A vast expanse of wasteland appears before their eyes. A series of towering and lofty sandstone peaks, wave after wave of sand dunes in endless succession stretching out into the horizon as far as the eye can see. R2 and C-3PO split up and one heads into the mountains while the other heads into the dunes in search of civilization. Unfortunately, they are both discovered by the Jawas, who look like people, but aren't. Thinking they are abandoned trash, the Jawas put the robots into an enormous sand crawler. Afterwards, the Jawas sell R2 and C-3PO to Uncle Owen. Owen needs robots to operate his condensers, so that the moisture in the air can be converted to water to irrigate his crops. Owen tells his nephew, Luke Skywalker, to wash the two robots clean. Luke takes them into a storeroom buried deep beneath the desert. You guys clean yourselves up, and recharge your batteries, and don't get into any trouble. After Luke finishes talking to the two robots, he walks toward a two-seated land-repelling kind of spacecraft parked in the hangar and prepares to repair the already damaged port side wing. But several hours pass, and Luke can't make any progress. Lately he's had a lot on his mind. His close friend has already joined the rebels in their fight against the Empire, but Uncle Owen won't let Luke leave the farm. It's just not fair. Luke throws his wrench on the work table and walks in the direction of the storeroom. C-3PO and R2 have already cleaned themselves up to be bright and shiny again. But Luke discovers that R2 has a small bump on his head from a collision, and begins to work away at the protrusion while saying, "There are a lot of charred spots around here. Seems like you guys have had quite an experience." C-3PO agrees, saying, "You can say that again, sir." Because of the rebellion, and other reasons, Luke's eyes flash brightly. "You're familiar with the rebellion against the Empire?" C-3PO answers evasively, saying, "We were just observers. We had nothing to do with the rebels." Luke is a little disappointed, and he goes back to scraping away at R2. After prying loose a shard of metal that was stuck in a circuit though, R2 miraculously begins projecting a 3D image of a graceful and beautiful young woman from the front of his chassis. Flustered, the girl hurriedly says, "Obi-Wan Kenobi, save me. You are my last and only hope." But the image quickly gives way to interference before he can hear what else she has to say. Surprised, Luke asks, "What happened?" C-3PO doesn't understand either. R2 beeps away for a while, and C-3PO translates for him, saying, "This is an old data tape. It should have been deleted a long time ago. It must have been left out by mistake. You really shouldn't take it seriously." Luke ignores C-3PO and continues to stare at the image longingly. Who is she? She's really beautiful. Is that all that was recorded? It sounds incomplete. He reaches out with his hand to touch R2, and R2 pulls back in fear. C-3PO is very displeased with his partner's behavior. After a short conversation between the two robots, C-3PO tells Luke that R2 says that he belongs to a man named Obi-Wan Kenobi who lives in this area. That short clip we saw is part of a private message for him. Luke wants to see the entire message, and R2 tells him that if he removes his control bolt he can probably play back the contents of the entire message. But after removing the bolt, the image disappears and does not come back. It looks like R2 has been scheming to protect his secret. Aunt Beru calls everyone to dinner, so Luke has to leave the two robots. While eating dinner, Luke asks Owen if Obi-Wan Kenobi is Ben Kenobi who lives nearby. Owen doesn't deny it, but tells Luke to stay away from him. Luke brings up leaving the farm again, but Owen still doesn't nod his head. Once Luke leaves, Aunt Beru says, "Luke isn't a farmer, we should let him go. He is too much like his father." Owen says in a worried voice, "That's just what I'm afraid of." Luke returns to the storeroom, and is surprised to discover that R2 is missing. C-3PO tells him that R2 has already left to complete his orders. Full of regret, Luke says, "God damn it, he tricked me into uninstalling his control device." The next morning, Luke takes C-3PO out in his sand speeder. He has C-3PO drive the speeder, tracking R2 in the desert. Luke and C-3PO finally catch up with R2 near the Western Lake. Just as they are about to start blaming R2 for running off, R2 suddenly jumps up and starts to make a mad symphony of whistling, sirens, and electronic alarm sounds. At the same time his chassis twists and turns. C-3PO also starts to look around nervously. A short time later, C-3PO says, R2 claims that an apparently nameless animal is headed our way from the southeast. Luke immediately unholsters his laser gun and, in a state of high alert, takes C-3PO to a high dune, all the while looking back to prevent R2 from running away again. When they arrive on top of the dune, Luke lies on his stomach and pulls out a pair of extra-large binoculars. He peers into the canyon and is surprised to see two of the strange beasts the Sand People are accustomed to riding. Just as the anxious Luke is about to get up, he suddenly sees a dark shadow cross in front of him. Violently raising his head, he discovers that the shadow belongs to a terrible sand person who is already standing right in front of him. The Sand People of the Sand Planet are not organic life forms, but they are also not entirely mechanical either. They are strong and ferocious, and specialize in the shady business of murder and plunder. C-3PO steps back in shock, and discovers there is nothing there for him to stand on, and so he falls down the sand dune. Luke finds himself momentarily stunned. The sand person raises his double-bladed axe to chop at Luke. Luke skillfully raises his gun to block the blow, shattering the barrel of his gun. Luke looks behind himself only to see a perilous cliff with no escape route. My God. Luke passes out. A sand person lifts him up and throws him to the side of the sand speeder before entering the speeder with his accomplice to seize valuables. It is precisely at this moment that a deep rumbling roar of anger echoes up the canyon. The Sand People immediately stop their plundering to look all around. The angry roar is getting closer and closer, and the Sand People begin to shout in panic, fleeing helter-skelter. In a flash, an old man appears at Luke's side. He smiles and kneels down to massage Luke's forehead and temples. Luke awakens at once. Luke studies the old man carefully and then calls out in happy astonishment, "Ben Kenobi, I'm really glad to see you." The old man asks, "Young man, what has brought you to this place?" After Luke finds R2 and C-3PO, he says to the old man, "R2 says he belongs to someone named Obi-Wan Kenobi, so I came looking here." Ben Kenobi acknowledges that he is Obi-Wan Kenobi, but says that he hasn't used this name in a long time. They ride the speeder to Ben Kenobi's well-hidden cave. Ben Kenobi immediately begins to work on R2. After only a minute, R2 begins to project the 3D image of Princess Leia from the front of his chassis. Luke again finds himself attracted to her stunning beauty. In a grave tone of voice, Princess Leia tells Kenobi that the Alliance to resurrect the Republic is in dire straits. Leia received orders from her father, the Viceroy of the planet Alderaan, to seek out Obi-Wan and request that he meet with her father. She wasn't able to complete her orders, and so she was forced to use this backup plan to contact him. She tells Kenobi that the information of life or death importance to the Alliance is already stored inside R2's memory banks and that her father knows how to recover the data. She begs him to guarantee that R2 is delivered safely to Alderaan. After the 3D image disappears, Luke asks in astonishment, "She called you a general and said that you served the Republic." Kenobi says, "I am a Jedi Knight, just like your father. We were both old guards of the Republic, sworn to protect and serve." Kenobi opens a box, looking for something, saying, "I've saved something from your father in here. He wanted me to give this to you once you were grown. I wanted to give it to you earlier, but your uncle wouldn't let me. He doesn't want you to follow the same path as your father." Kenobi pulls out something which looks like the hilt of a sword. With one press of a button, the hilt emits a blue-white beam resembling an incomparably sharp blade. He tells Luke, "This is a lightsaber, the weapon of a Jedi Knight. Those who can master the lightsaber are 1 in a million." Luke asks how his father died. Kenobi says he was murdered by Vader. Originally Vader was Kenobi's brightest disciple, but he ended up using the martial skills which he learned and his own extraordinary innate powers to help the Empire destroy virtually all of the Jedi. Kenobi gives the lightsaber to Luke and tells him he wants him to accompany him to Alderaan and to become a Jedi Knight like his father. He says, "Frankly, I need your help. I'm already an old man and it will be difficult for me to complete this task alone. This is a matter of utmost importance. Luke yearns to join the fight against the Empire, but he isn't willing to go against Uncle Owen's wishes. After all, Uncle Owen raised him from when he was a small child. So he only agrees to take Kenobi as far as Mos Eisley, to help Kenobi on his way to the planet Alderaan. While rushing to Mos Eisley in the speeder, they come across a number of dead Jawas and the wreckage of their sandcrawler in a canyon. Luke recognizes that they are the same Jawas who sold the robots to Uncle Owen. Kenobi surmises that these Jawas were killed by Imperial troops. Luke wonders, why would Imperial troops suddenly show up here? Why would they kill the Jawas? Could it be that they were tracking R2 and C-3PO? If that's the case, then they must have asked the Jawas who they sold the droids to. Could this mean, oh no? Luke is extremely uneasy. And, ignoring Kenobi's protestations, he jumps into the speeder and pushes the accelerator as far as it will go, leaving Kenobi and the two robots in a cloud of sand and dust. When Luke arrives back home, the mouth of the cave is bellowing forth smoke like a small volcano. He tries to rush in several times, but each time the thick smoke and hot air force him back. He finally manages to force his way in. Looking everywhere and shouting in every direction, Aunt Beru, Uncle Owen, in the end he discovers they have already been burned to black and char, their corpses still smoking. Luke nearly passes out from grief and anger. Luke returns to where he left Kenobi, rubbing tears from his eyes, and in a determined tone of voice tells Kenobi, I want to go to Alderaan with you. There's nothing left for me here. I want to become a Jedi Knight, just like my father. Meanwhile, Princess Leia has been sent to the Empire's newly built military base, an enormous man-made moon called the Death Star. Tarkin and Vader employ a variety of ruses to force Leia to reveal the location of the rebel base, but they are all unsuccessful. Finally, Tarkin comes up with another venomous plot. To deal with this kind of obstinate behavior, the best strategy is to threaten a secondary object separate from the actual object, which we desire. What we should do now is show her the full might of the Death Star. Commander of the base, inform the programmers to fire on the planet Alderaan. By the time the Death Star departs for Alderaan, Kenobi and Luke have already hired the cosmonaut Solo to transport them in his spacecraft. Just as the two robots and Solo's assistant, the ape-man Chewbacca, are boarding the craft, they are discovered by the Imperial troops. Alarms begin to sound from all around. The interstellar spacecraft rises swiftly into the air. But the scanner on the rear of the craft soon displays 5 tracers, indicating that there are 5 Imperial warships getting ready to attack them. But Solo says with no small amount of confidence, once we've entered hyperspeed, they'll never catch up with us. Just as predicted, soon after the vessel enters hyperspeed, they shake the 5 Imperial warships. During their flight, Kenobi teaches the way of the lightsaber to Luke. In order to get revenge and oppose the Empire, Luke immerses himself in training and quickly masters the art of the lightsaber. Upon entering the vicinity of space around the planet Alderaan, they suddenly find themselves face to face with an oncoming meteorite shower. Solo is surprised, and it is only by turning on the stabilizer that he is able to prevent their summary destruction. As they continue on, something else makes them even more surprised and uneasy, namely that the planet Alderaan has disappeared. Given the particular type of energy levels and the amount of rubble they detect outside the ship, they can only conclude that Alderaan, home to innumerable cities and life forms, has already been destroyed by some unknown thing. Kenobi believes this to be an evil act of the Empire, but Solo doesn't think that the Empire has the ability to destroy whole planets. As if in answer to Solo, at this moment an Imperial battleship appears. As this is a short-range vessel, it is inconceivable that it could have followed them from the desert planet. Solo tails the Imperial battleship, which is flying towards a moon which grows ever brighter, with light appearing to be produced from within. Solo admits that Empire must have a base here after all, despite the fact that on the star map Alderaan doesn't have any moons. Nearing closer and closer to the moon, the craters and ravines come into view. But it all looks rather strange. The mountains are too steep and straight, and the ravines look too planned and unnatural. Kenobi says, "It's a space station. Solo doesn't believe a space station could be so big, and that it would be impossible for it to be man-made." The normally reserved Kenobi suddenly shouts, "Turn the craft around." Solo adjusts the controls, and the spacecraft turns sharply, but cannot escape because it has come under the control of an invisible force, drawing it closer and closer to the enormous space station. How could they know that they are facing the Imperial Death Star? Luke shouts, "Why are we still moving toward it?" In a defeated tone of voice, Solo says, "We are in a tractor beam, and it's pulling us in against the enormous bulk of the Death Star." The spacecraft becomes a tiny speck until it is finally sucked inside. Meanwhile, in the meeting room of the Death Star, Vader is staring fixedly at Star Map. Fascinatingly enough, even after the largest device of mass destruction ever, the Death Star, destroyed the planet Alderaan, this star map looks the same as always. Indeed, it is only after careful inspection that it becomes apparent that a tiny dot is missing. The loudspeaker announces that a ship has been taken captive in the ruins of Alderaan. The identifying marks match those of the spacecraft which left the desert planet without authorization. Vader immediately heads to the docking bay to direct a search of the vessel by the Imperial troops. The Imperial troops enter the spacecraft. Although they look everywhere, they are surprised to find that the ship is empty. The controls are offline and every system is shut down. A soldier turns on the controls only to discover that, according to the navigation log, the crew of the ship disembarked before the spacecraft took off from Tatooine and that the ship flew to Alderaan on autopilot. Vader orders a fully equipped scanning crew to be dispatched to complete a thorough search of the spacecraft. He then saunters away and the remaining soldiers leave the ship in quick succession. Silence reigns inside the spacecraft. Suddenly, a section of the floor lifts up and Luke and Solo stick their heads out, with Kenobi and the others appearing shortly thereafter. Solo stretches and says, "This ship ain't going nowhere." Kenobi gives him a mischievous look and says, "Just leave it to me." At the same time, two members of the scanning team have arrived at the entrance of the ship and report to the two soldiers standing guard. The guards want them to report the results of their scan immediately, and the two technicians nod, lugging their heavy scanning equipment up the stairs and onto the ship. The scanning technicians have only just entered the ship when a loud roar sounds from inside, causing the two guards to run inside as well. But as soon as they enter, the 8-man Chewbacca with Luke and the others make short work of them. In a small control room near the spacecraft, an officer in charge of the tow tractors for the docking bay discovers that the guards are missing and calls out over the radio, "THX-1138, why have you left your station?" In response, the receiver produces only static. A short while later, a guard descends from the ship and waves his arm at the officer in the control room, tapping on his helmet to indicate that his communication device is malfunctioning. The officer opens the door to the control room and the guard shoots him with a high-energy beam. The officer is immediately knocked to the ground. It turns out that this soldier is actually Solo in disguise. Shortly thereafter, two more soldiers, Luke, Kenobi, and the rest, walk into the room. As soon as he enters the room, Kenobi stands in front of the complex and difficult to describe controls to the computer system and begins to operate the device. The screen shows a schematic of the Death Star, which the old man studies carefully. At the same time, the two robots are inspecting an equally complex control panel. After a short while, R2 discovers something important and whistles loudly. Kenobi wants R2 to connect his data port to the computer with a cable so that he can download all of the data from the Death Star and find the power source for the tractor beam. The lights flash up and down R2's chassis and the drone of the computer operating at high speed continues for several minutes before the task is complete. Kenobi volunteers for the mission to sabotage the tractor beam. Luke wants to go with him, but the old man wants him to wait for his signal and look after the two robots. Kenobi says, "It is of utmost importance that you get the droids to the rebel base, otherwise many more planets will meet with the same cruel fate as Alderaan." After Kenobi leaves, R2 begins to whistle madly in front of the control board. It turns out that he has discovered Princess Leia. She is here, on level 5, imprisoned in cell block AA23. According to the information on the computer, it has already been decided that she will be put to a slow death. Luke suggests that they rescue her, but Solo says he won't go. Luke tries to appeal to his morality, but Solo still won't do it. Finally, Luke promises him a big reward and Solo is forced to agree. They put Chewbacca in manacles and pretend to be 2 Imperial soldiers escorting a captive out of the small control room, moving deep into the bowels of the enormous base. A steady stream of Imperial soldiers, technicians, and robots pass by, but they mostly ignore them, with only a few individuals giving the ape-man Chewbacca curious looks. They take the elevator to level 5 where an officer interrogates them, saying, "Where are you taking this thing?" Chewbacca howls, and Solo jabs him in the ribs to shut him up. Luke smoothly replies, "We're transferring this prisoner from cell block TS-138. The officer says that nobody notified him, and turns to consult his instrument panel. After a quick glance at Luke, Solo unlocks Chewbacca's manacles and says something to him under his breath. Straight away, Chewbacca roars and grabs Solo's gun. Solo pretends to be alarmed, shouting loudly, "Watch, he's slipped his restraints, we're screwed." He and Luke pull out their guns and let loose a barrage of fire in Chewbacca's direction. Chewbacca dodges and weaves. None of the blasts hit him, instead destroying the instrument panel and killing the 3 guards. The officer is the last to be felled. The loudspeaker demands a status report, but Solo ignores it. He quickly finds Leia's cell number and tells Luke to go rescue her while he and Chewbacca stay behind to stand guard. Luke uses his laser gun to blast open the door of Leia's cell. He takes off his helmet and says to the stunned princess, "I've come with Ben Kenobi to rescue you. We found your 2 robots." Princess Leia sighs happily. The Imperial stormtroopers pour in one after another, leaving Luke and the 4 others trapped in the corridor. With no exit in sight and no plan for escape, Princess Leia takes Luke's gun and blasts open a small grate in the metal wall, leading everyone into the garbage chute. The stench of the garbage is hard to bear, and they look for an exit, but all they can find is an access hatch which is locked tight. Just as they are starting to get nervous, something unexpected happens. The rumble of machinery and the 2 walls on either side of the chute suddenly start to move slowly inwards, making the narrow chute even narrower. Luke takes out a small communicator and impatiently yells for C-3PO, but he gets no response. Just as all 4 of them are about to be crushed by the walls of the garbage chute, C-3PO's reply is transmitted through the radio. Luke quickly asks him to turn off the device which is controlling the garbage chute so that they won't be turned into a beady pulp. Once the 2 walls have returned to their original position, Luke pushes aside the trash covering the escape hatch so that he can see the garbage chute number clearly. Right away he radios C-3PO, saying, "Open the inspection hatch for chute number 336-191. In this way they are able to escape from the garbage chute. But as soon as they enter the corridor they run into the Imperial stormtroopers again. Solo takes Chewbacca to fight them off while Luke and Princess Leia run off down a side corridor only to discover a bottomless chasm blocking their way, with no way forward and the enemy close behind. What can be done? In a flash of inspiration, Luke finds an electrical cable and lassos the opposite side. He embraces Princess Leia with one arm and grabs the cable with the other, using the cable like a pendulum to swing across. From there they run quickly in the direction of the spacecraft. Luke, Princess Leia, Solo, Chewbacca, and the 2 robots are reunited near the spacecraft. Coincidentally, Kenobi has just finished his mission to destroy the power source of the tractor beam. As they are walking towards the spacecraft, Vader suddenly appears. To protect the others, Kenobi stays behind to face Vader alone. He says to him calmly, "You still have much to learn." He turns on his lightsaber and Vader does the same, saying to him in answer, "My school days are far behind me. It is now time for the student to surpass the master." Kenobi lunges at Vader furiously, and Vader blocks with equal speed. The 2 men parry back and forth. sending forth a shower of sparks and a cascade of flashes. Due to his age, Kenobi can't keep up and he is forced to retreat, step by step, towards the spacecraft. Luke and the others take advantage of the fact that the guards defending the spacecraft are distracted by Kenobi and Vader's fight to quickly make their way to the craft. Kenobi looks back at the ship and Vader takes advantage of the opportunity to bring down his lightsaber. Lamentably, it is in this way Kenobi sacrifices himself. When Luke sees Kenobi get cut down, he wants to rush over and revenge him, but Princess Leia holds him back, saying, "This isn't what Kenobi wanted for you. We'll have a chance to get revenge later. What we need to do now is leave here right away." Only after hearing this can Luke be convinced to board the spacecraft. The vessel rises quickly into the air. Luke sits down, despondent over Kenobi's death. Princess watches him silently for a time, and then takes off her cloak and drapes it softly over Luke's shoulders. Despite the enemy's best efforts to intercept and attack their spacecraft, they manage to shake them, swiftly arriving at the secret rebel base on the fourth moon of the faraway planet of Yavin. The rebels welcome Leia back, greeting her warmly. Leia says, "I don't have time to talk about the past. I believe we were followed." Solo wants to disagree, but Leia cuts him off, saying, "That's the only way to explain why we were able to escape so easily." Under Princess Leia's direction, the rebels quickly decide to attack the Death Star using the technical schematics collected by R2. Leia says, "This is our only hope. We have to find a weak point in the Death Star and destroy it." Little R2 is now the center of attention, his chassis projecting a diagram of the computer and database. The nearby bank of computer screens and monitors are displaying the data which has been stored on the microscopic data tapes that make up the robot's brain. C-3PO sees all this and is surprised to no end. After careful analysis, they come to the conclusion that the Death Star's only weakness is a 2-meter wide exhaust vent. The exhaust vent covers an unshielded duct which leads directly to the reactor which powers the base. If they can't hit the exhaust vent with a proton torpedo, it will set off a chain reaction which will destroy the Death Star. Based on this information, the rebels quickly develop a plan of attack and put it into action immediately, hoping to destroy the Death Star before it destroys them. Solo and his partner Chewbacca can't be bothered about any of this. However, having already received a generous reward which they are busily loading into their safe, Luke tries to get him to stay and fight, but Solo jokes with him, saying, "What's the point of getting a reward if you're not around to spend it? Attacking the Death Star isn't heroic, it's suicidal." Disheartened, all Luke can do is leave. However, it seems that Luke and Solo have developed a friendship in the course of their fighting the Empire together. Before Luke boards the X-Wing he is to fly into battle, Princess Leia comes to see him off and wish him success. R2 will accompany Luke on his ship, so C-3PO also arrives to see off his partner. The fighters take to the air. Luke belongs to Blue Squadron, which is tasked with defending Red Squadron during their attack on the Death Star exhaust vent, and, if necessary, step in to take their place. The Death Star appears before them, already close enough for them to make out the docking bays, antennas, man-made valleys and hills. How much creative ingenuity and material wealth it must have taken to build a battle station as big as a moon. The Empire originally thought that the rebels would have put all of their energy into defending their base, so they are entirely unprepared for the rebel offensive, forcing them to rush to employ high-energy weapons and lightning to repel the rebels. The rebel fighters fly back and forth, firing upon the radar equipment and gun arrays on the Death Star. Luke's sharpshooting leaves a string of fireballs across the sky, but Luke's spacecraft can't turn in time, forcing him to fly directly through the fireballs. Luckily, the spacecraft can withstand the extremely high temperatures, allowing Luke to escape by the skin of his teeth. Vader orders all of his fighters out to meet the attack, the two sides pitching into a fierce battle to the death. Luke destroys 2 enemy ships, but his own ship is damaged in the process. Agitated, he tells R2 to begin repairs. Meanwhile, Red Leader has led 2 ships into a long trench full of cables where they plan to attack the exhaust vent. A fiery explosion momentarily blocks their way. But upon entering the narrow trench, the enemy fire ceases altogether. The terrible and sudden stillness unexpectedly putting them even more on edge. Suddenly, 3 enemy ships appear behind them, led by Vader himself. The 3 Red Squadron ships are forced deeper into the trench. In such narrow circumstances, there is simply no way for them to use their formidable flying skills to full effect. The 3 ships of Red Squadron find themselves in dire straits and are soon completely destroyed. Blue Squadron immediately replaces Red Squadron, with Blue Leader personally leading the first flight and Luke leading the second flight as backup. Ultimately, the responsibility to destroy the Death Star falls to Luke's flight. While Luke leads his 2 squadron mates into the trench, Vader leads 2 fighters to press them from behind. With his 2 squadron mates covering him, Luke is able to advance towards the exhaust vent. Luke's 2 squadron mates soon sacrifice themselves along with their fighters. Tears streaming down his face, Luke is filled with determination to revenge Uncle Owen, Aunt Beru, Kenobi, and his squadron mates. Vader commands the 2 craft escorting him to follow Luke. He is only moments away from certain death when one of the vessels explodes in a ball of fire. The crew of the other vessel looks around in fright for the source of the attack, only to find themselves likewise engulfed in flames only seconds later. A spacecraft appears above the trench, swooping down to attack Vader's fighter. Vader is completely unprepared, and his ship receives a direct hit. Losing control of the vessel, Vader and his craft spiral out into the endless expanse of space. "I've cleared the way, Luke old buddy. Now go blow up the damn thing so we can all go home." Upon hearing Solo's voice, Luke looks up through the sunroof at Solo's spacecraft and smiles. Luke flies his X-Wing up to the exhaust vent. As soon as his crushers lock onto the target, he pulls the trigger, launching all of his proton torpedoes. Luke then steers his spacecraft out of the trench, the cockpit ringing with the sound of voices shouting excitedly, "You've done it. You've done it." Meanwhile, the Death Star thunders ominously, leaving Luke shaken. The Death Star explodes. It sends out a flash that is brighter than the stars in the distance, so bright that it is difficult to look at directly. A split second later, the air is filled with 100 million shards of metal. A fitting memorial to the Empire. Returning victorious, as soon as he steps off of the spacecraft, Luke embraces Solo in a hug, saying, "I knew you'd come back. If you hadn't arrived when you did, I would have been finished." Solo laughs and says, "I couldn't let you take on that base by yourself, and I didn't want to let you take all the credit, either." Princess Leia comes forward to welcome them. She falls into Luke's arms, hugging him tightly and only then turning to Solo. Likewise, C-3PO welcomes R2 back, and the rebel base is filled with joy. At the victory celebration, Princess Leia gives Luke, Solo, Chewbacca, and the droids R2 and C-3PO each a medal. Luke feels as if his entire heart and soul have come under the sway of the princess. Noticing his unrestrained gaze, she smiles.